We are delighted to present a program for 1 hour on FEMA disasters, what lawyers can do after a disaster strikes. And we're specifically going to be talking about FEMA designations where individual assistance is available and FEMA appeals. So I'm delighted to have two attorneys speak with us this morning. Shrusti Kathari has several roles, and I'll let her describe her roles, but she is with Legal Services Corporation and also with the ABA. I've seen her present after disasters in Houston struck, and she is an expert on FEMA and helping after disasters. Charles Burrows, Charlie, works for Legal Aid of Southeastern Pennsylvania, and he came to LASP after Hurricane Ida was declared a disaster. It struck over multiple counties, over multiple programs, but the bulk of the cases and the harm struck in the territory served by LASP. So he has experience over the last several years working on the legal aid needs of folks who are hit by a disaster. And Jen Heverly is on the call as well. She's the managing attorney in our Williamsport office, and 3 of the counties struck by the latest disaster in Pennsylvania, Hurricane Debby, took place in her office in the service area that Williamsport covers. And so she's been organizing the hotline for North Penn Legal Services and Northwestern. Northwestern covers the area of Potter County, and we'll be showing you some maps and talking about that. And Jackie Logler, the executive director from Northwest, has been on the FEMA hotline calls as well and preparing her staff to assist. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Shrusti if you want to get started, and then Charles will speak as well. Thank you so much for joining us today. Just a housekeeping note, we will be launching 2 polls during the CLE. For those who want CLE credit, please respond to the polls when we send them so we can give you the proper credit. And Sean will be placing in the chat a link to the materials, the PowerPoint today, and we'll also forward to you after the event. Thank you so much, everybody.
Well, thank you, Lori, and big thank you for the Pennsylvania folks for having us on here. We are very honestly stoked to help attorneys help disaster survivors as they navigate through the recent disaster that's hit Pennsylvania, Tropical Storm Debby. As Lori mentioned, there we go. As Lori mentioned, I am here in multiple capacities, but today specifically, I'm here as the Vice Director of Implementations of the Disaster Legal Services team at the ABA. The DLS team is responsible for administering FEMA's Disaster Legal Services program, and you'll learn more about the nitty-gritty as we go through. In my day job, I do work as a disaster grants program counsel at the Legal Services Corporation and manage the congressionally appropriated funds and other revenue streams that we have to assist disaster survivors across the nation. I'll turn it over to Charlie for intros.
Thanks, Rusi. Hi, everyone. My name is Charlie Burrows. For those of you who don't know me, I have been working at Legal Aid of Southeastern PA for just a bit over 2 years now. I started in late 2022. I've been serving as our regional disaster relief staff attorney, housed in our community engagement unit. And what it means by regional is that I cover all 4 counties in our service area, which is Bucks County, Chester County, Delaware County, and Montgomery County. And I've been offering disaster legal services for folks impacted by Hurricane Ida, which was the most recent FEMA disaster declaration prior to this one. That was in September of 2021. And we can talk a little bit more about in detail which areas were affected. But yeah, I have experience with doing the direct legal work. So if anybody has specific questions or wants any elaboration on how things work on the ground, just feel free to speak up and ask questions.
Thanks, Charlie. So today, as I said, we're here to talk about DR 4815, commonly known as Pennsylvania Tropical Storm Debby. This is I want to start with some background on how disasters work and how frequently they're happening right now. In the year 2024, we have had more than 40 disaster declarations with individual assistance approved across the nation. This is just shockingly high compared to last year's number, which was 18 disasters declared. And our DLS team has just been working day and night trying to keep up with all of them. But the truth of the matter is, disaster is turning into a growth industry. And it's something that we all need to prepare for and work towards and just be ready for whatever comes down our path. States that have never had disasters are now getting disasters. States that have been safe states are learning how hard it is to activate in the aftermath of a disaster when there's no infrastructure in place to begin with, when there's no community that you've developed and worked through, and there's just no understanding of what to do when a disaster strikes. So I'm glad that everybody is here wanting to learn more. And unfortunately, we are meeting in the aftermath of a disaster, which is just not the greatest time. But Pennsylvania has a history of responding to disasters already. Prior to Tropical Storm Debby, the last disaster that hit Pennsylvania area was Ida, as Charlie mentioned, and before that it was Tropical Storm Sandy. So it's good to work through these processes as they come along. But for Tropical Storm Debby right now, this was a disaster that occurred on September 11th this year. And sorry, it was declared on September 11th. I think I have that backwards on the slide. It should be the other way around. It occurred on September 11th and October was declared area. The FEMA application deadline is November 12th. And the DLS hotline number that's activated where survivors can call to get assistance is 800-326-7436. The counties with individual assistance are Lycoming, Potter, Tioga, and Union. And the survivors may come from that area, but I do want to mention that people get displaced in the aftermath of disaster. So you might find survivors in neighborhood counties or across other parts of the state or even in New York as well. So I turned over to Charlie to talk about the Ida response.
Yeah, sure. So this is the same layout just for the disaster that I've been covering, which is the Pennsylvania remnants of Hurricane Ida. That happened in September of 2021. Well, it happened over the course of a few days, but it mainly took place during the beginning of September 2021. The disaster was declared about a week later. As you can see on the map, and this is one of the challenges that legal aid organizations face when they address disasters, is that it doesn't just stick to one service area. It's the bulk of it was in our service area, but not all of it. So like I mentioned, we cover Bucks County, Chester County, Delaware County, and Montgomery County, which are the four collar counties around Philadelphia. But Philadelphia itself was also impacted, which is covered by Philadelphia Legal Assistance, along with York counties and Bedford County and Northampton County, which are covered by Mid-Penn. So it was, and Northampton is in your service area as well. So it covers multiple areas, and collaboration is a big part of addressing these problems. When we first started, there was no infrastructure on the ground for legal services at this point. We didn't have a full-time disaster staff attorney to address these issues. So there's a lot of the front end stuff that went into this right off the bat, which was getting the hotline set up, getting connected with the VOAD organization, which stands for Volunteer Organizations Active in Disasters. Just plugging that right off the jump, that's a really great way to get connected with other organizations that do this work. That's like your Salvation Armies and your Red Crosses, and Team Rubicons, and things like that, that do the other components of disaster recovery. So there was a lot of that up initially, getting everything up off the ground and working collaboratively with other organizations. But after that process, then it just jumped right into the legal services work, which was mainly around FEMA appeals and FEMA applications. And we'll talk about that in more detail later.
Okay. Charlie, do you want to talk about the legal aid organizations around Pennsylvania?
Yeah, sure. This kind of goes to what I was saying earlier, that one of the challenges is that the hurricanes aren't going to stick to, well, hurricane in this context, but any sort of natural disaster, it's not going to stick to one service area. PA has a pretty fragmented legal aid network. The PA legal aid network actually hasn't updated it yet because now we have Summit Legal Aid as one of our new organizations following that merger. So this is a rough sketch of the counties that are covered. So you can see legal aid of southeastern Pennsylvania, where I work, is covered down in the bottom right, just in the collar counties around Philadelphia. Um, PLA covers only Philadelphia, and then North Penn and Mid Penn have two of the larger regions. They cover a lot of counties throughout the state. Summit and Neighborhood both cover the Allegheny County and Pittsburgh and those surrounding areas, and then there's Northwestern up for Erie. So just knowing this, you don't have to like memorize every which counties and which legal services, but just being cognizant of the fact that there are multiple legal aid organizations that are going to be involved in these. So as you can see, just off of this disaster, North Penn has 3 of the 4 counties. Tioga, Lycoming, and Elks are all included in North Penn's, and then Potter and Northwestern is also involved as well. So there would have to be some collaboration between those 2 organizations to make sure that everyone involved is getting the representation they need from the right place. Because that can cause some headaches if you are trying to navigate a disaster and there's a sense of urgency there, and you have to spend a lot of time putting people in the right bucket, so to speak, and making sure they get to the right place. If you're well aware of this map and who covers what areas, then that can really help expedite that process.
Thanks, Charlie. Well, the amount of FEMA assistance that's been provided for this disaster has been for quite a few people. And the numbers actually exceeded the 746. It's now at 1,300 people who have applied for FEMA assistance, and that results in more people needing help as FEMA appeals and issues arise in the aftermath of a disaster. So we'll kind of talk through what kind of assistance is available and what can you as a lawyer do, because the last thing people think about is, oh, a disaster just struck, let me call my lawyer. That's not on anybody's mind, and it should be, unfortunately, on people's minds, so that we can help them get to the recovery process as things go on. Just some disclaimers before we start. So in 2024, FEMA did update a lot of their policies to make things easier for the survivors to access the assistance. And you can get more updates on the information there at the FEMA site, and we'll talk about it throughout the presentation as well. These updates refer to disasters that have occurred and been declared that have been declared after March 22, and we'll refer to them as we go through. Let's start by talking about the emergency management cycle. So the emergency management cycle is what really helps guide what part of the disaster process we're in. It starts out with preparedness, which is what we always encourage everybody to do as an organization, as a person, as a human, to get ready and be prepared for any disaster that might come towards you or your staff or your offices or your clients. The last thing you want to do is exchange business cards in the middle of a hurricane at 2 a.m. It's great. It's a very common saying from the Harris County emergency management officer in Houston, and in the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey. So preparedness, I really cannot emphasize the importance of it more. And it's hard to do because nobody wants to think about a disaster when they don't need to. Well, as soon as the preparedness area is done, that's when the disaster will strike, and we'll immediately go into the response phase. The response phase is where the damage assessments will happen, and people are going to be seeking safety, shelter, and just to get back into their homes, and respond to the disaster as things happen. We'll slowly move into the recovery phase, which comes in short and long terms. And long term can truly mean years for some people. And years as in like actually really long term years. Folks from Katrina are still dealing with recoupment issues 18, 19 years later. So it can have really long tails for some folks. The recovery process is where you are going to work with your insurance to get things repaired, get back in your homes, and just get back to normalcy. At that point is where the mitigation portion of things start. Mitigation for an individual could mean something as simple as putting drains in their homes or making some infrastructure improvements to keep them safer for the next round of disasters. For cities, for government officials, it could mean robust structures being built to help ensure that flooding doesn't happen in their cities and their regions, and so on and so forth. And the cycle will continue as it goes forward. So what do you do in a response phase when you've immediately been struck by a disaster and you need to find a shelter? Well, the Red Cross opens up shelters across all disaster regions, and you can find open shelters by checking their website, by texting shelter and your zip code to the number provided there on the slide, by calling 211, and finally by relying on your local news. That's going to be your first point of contact for any updated information. Shelters and DRCs were typically open as soon as the disaster happens. So a lot of times shelters will turn into DRCs once FEMA is activated and on the ground. And DRCs are disaster recovery centers. That's where all the organizations that assist disaster survivors will show up and they can go and get assistance as needed. FEMA will be there to take in applications, to answer questions, and legal aid organizations have a right to be there at the DRCs to ensure that there's a table and that people are able to access legal services that are provided. You can find the DRC on the DRC locator in your region. And I believe there's still one open in Pennsylvania right now for the current disaster. So what do we do when a disaster strikes? How do we support and help? So the LSC, the Legal Services Corporation, came up with a disaster task force in 2018 in the aftermath of the hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria. And as part of the task force, there was a very detailed review and investigation done where we talked to the survivors, the responding agencies, and the experts on the ground to learn better about how we can improve our delivery of legal services and response in the aftermath of a disaster. Well, this was a chart that was in existence prior to the task force, and it was adopted over the years by multiple states, Mississippi, Florida, Texas, Louisiana, and this chart has just evolved over the years. The task force report did adopt the chart and ensured that we were able to better understand the life cycles of a disaster issue that occur after that in the aftermath. So in the first short term, 1 to 6 weeks time period, you're going to see more of the quicker, shorter issues, but are more shelter related, safety related to ensure that people are able to get back in their homes. So you'll see lease terminations and evictions, utility shutoffs by landlords, security deposits that are not being returned, repair issues, FEMA applications, any documents that might have flooded away or been destroyed in the disaster that need replacement, and income protection such as unemployment applications and public benefits, etc. In the medium term, which is 1 to 6 months after an event, the issues will start getting a little bit more complicated as things go, and the volume might decrease a little bit, but you're going to see FEMA and SBA appeals coming through at this point. Landlord-tenant issues honestly just never go away. And then you're going to continue seeing foreclosure prevention, title clearing, which is the gift that keeps on giving for our survivors. Insurance scams, repair and contractor fraud scams, price gouging, and then something that people don't often think about are family and education issues. So when a family might be displaced from one county to the other, and they might have children that need specific access to special needs education, you might have to help them obtain that in the different districts that they've been moved to, guardianships and supportive decision making, etc. 6 months to years, and as I said, it truly can be years after a disaster. I know when I worked at Lone Star Legal Aid as a staff attorney, we closed our final Ike case 10 years after the disaster occurred. Louisiana folks are still going through the Hurricane Katrina recoupment issues, like I mentioned before. But at this point, the number of cases will kind of reduce, but the complexity will increase. So you're going to see more of the difficult foreclosures, the flood insurance issues, FEMA recoupments, tax applications, and bankruptcies, things of that sort. All right. we can go forward and talk about FEMA at this point. So why does FEMA come on board? How does FEMA come on board? What is the process for that? So once a disaster strikes, preliminary damage assessments are done by the local emergency management offices. And if the thresholds are met, the governor of the state or the tribal nation will request a disaster declaration from the President of the United States. Once the president declares a disaster, which includes individual assistance, FEMA assistance will be made available. And that's typically what it means when somebody said, oh, go apply for FEMA. There are two branches of FEMA assistance, public assistance and individual assistance. And public assistance, contrary to the name, means that it's funding available for infrastructure for the state and local governments. Individual assistance is available for the actual public who actually needs FEMA assistance. That's where they can apply and get funding from the federal government to recover. Where does the guidance come from? It comes from the CFR, the Robert T. Stafford Disaster Relief Act, the DRA, and then the IAPPG, which is the policy guide that FEMA publishes. You can find links to that here. And of course, the latest edits by FEMA that were activated this year. What does it mean to apply for FEMA? And I know I'm going a little fast. If there's any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. But what does it mean to apply for FEMA? What happens in the FEMA process is when a person puts in an application, FEMA will review the documentation. If there's home damage that requires an inspector visit, they will send an inspector to the survivor's home to look around and see what the issues are. It's best if the inspector is there basically to document everything. They're not there to be the decision maker. They're going to write down all the damage that's there, all the issues that are existing, and submit it to FEMA for a determination. FEMA staff will then go through the documentation and make a determination on what types of assistance they are willing to provide you and send a letter out. Once the letter is out, you have the ability to appeal the decision made by FEMA. And if you do so, you submit that in, FEMA reviews that appeal, provides another decision, and you can either circle back with a second appeal, or you can move forward with your recovery process. If at the end of the day, few years down the road sometimes, FEMA decides that you were provided funds that were in excess of what you were owed, they will come back and recoup, and that's where the recoupment period will kind of start. So FEMA applications can be filled in multiple different ways, and you have about 60 days after the deadline. After the declaration to apply for assistance. As part of the new 2024 guideline updates, FEMA will now accept late applications up to 60 days after the initial deadline. In the past, the late application deadline used to be 30 days, and in the reforms, they've updated it to 60 now. So you do have the ability to continue, but for late applications, you have to show some good cause as to why you didn't apply in the initial 60-day period. Like I said, you can apply online, mobile, phone, in-person DRCs, various different ways. Who can apply? So you have to be a U.S. citizen, non-citizen, national, or qualified alien to apply for IHP assistance. Any household member who meets that criteria can apply. So if there's a child that is a U.S. citizen, you can apply through them. And there's various other qualifications that work out as well.
Just a note, you should see a poll that was launched. So please answer the poll if you're participating and want CLE credits. Thank you.
Thanks, Lori. All right. Well, I'll take a pause there. Are there any questions? I see a note in the chat. The remaining open DRCs in Tioga. Thank you, Lori. That is a great location to meet survivors and get assistance. Okay, if there are no other questions at this point, I will move forward with the barrage of information I'm about to throw at you. So individual assistance. So this is the updated chart on how individual assistance works under FEMA. It took me a really long time to make this actually look functional. So let's work through it as we go. So under the individual assistance umbrella of FEMA, there are many different programs that exist. One of them is disaster unemployment assistance, which is exactly what it sounds like, disaster unemployment assistance. You can apply through the DOL to get assistance when you've lost your job as a matter of the disaster. disaster case management, which is where other social services organizations will work with FEMA to set up tables at DRCs and other locations to ensure that they can connect survivors with services that are available. Disaster legal services. This is a portion of FEMA that is administered, like I stated, by the American Bar Association's Disaster Legal Services team. A few of the members are on the call here today, I see. And DLS is basically a program that is just administered by the ABA. All the ABA does is coordinate and ensure that there's a hotline available so that survivors can reach the correct legal aid entities in their region to get assistance for free as necessary. FEMA does publish information of the assistance available on the documentations that they provide. And the local legal aid partners, LSC funded or not, will oftentimes support it, and the state bar organizations will also help out with pro bono attorney assistance. I'll skip through the individual household programs and move to mass care real quick. So mass care and emergency assistance and crisis counseling assistance programs are also two additional programs of the individual assistance portion of FEMA, and they are exactly as they sound like. Mass care will help the organizations in the regions assist folks, and then the crisis counseling folks will come in and join DRCs to help people manage counseling and obtain counseling services as necessary. Turning our attention back to the individuals and household programs, that's one of the biggest programs that FEMA has. And this is exactly what it means when they say apply for FEMA. When you apply for FEMA assistance, you can get assistance from two different buckets. One is housing assistance, and one is ONA, other needs assistance. You'll see a lot of acronyms throughout the presentations. So please stop me if there's something that gets confusing. But under housing assistance, there's two portions. You can either get money for housing, or you can get direct housing assistance, such as a FEMA trailer or some other form where FEMA will help you get into a home. Financial assistance is the most common. That's where FEMA will help pay for lodging, for rental assistance, for any repairs to your home, replacement of things. And the newest portion of this is displacement assistance. It's for folks that have been displaced across the region when disasters strike. On the other needs assistance side, one of the biggest changes that has been made since 2024 is that FEMA no longer requires a survivor to apply for the Small Business Administration loan before qualifying for some of the ONA categories. So now you have a very great chance of going through and getting ONA assistance without going through the hoop of jumping through SBA loans. And the types of assistance that are available are personal property, transportation, medical, dental, funeral, clean and sanitize, moving storage, serious needs, and other miscellaneous. Funeral was added during the COVID-19 pandemic, and then serious needs assistance was added this year, and it replaces another type of assistance called critical needs assistance. Serious needs assistance provides $750. It's now $770 for those survivors who are in serious needs of just needing food, shelter, and the basic necessities in the aftermath of a disaster. And you have to apply as soon as possible. Sometimes they do require an inspection before you're approved for it, but it's great to have this new form of assistance available. I'm going to skip through this slide because we kind of covered it already. But what are some tips and tricks of managing housing assistance? So the first thing you want to know is you need to manage your client's expectation. FEMA is truly not here to make anybody whole. FEMA is not here to replace any family heirlooms or anything of value. They're there to make your house repaired to a minimal livable condition. And this is honestly a mistake I personally made when I was a brand new attorney working on disaster cases. I had a client that came through and said, "Oh, I have $1,000 rug. It's a $3,000 rug. It was a family heirloom and she wanted it replaced." And me being the young attorney that I was, I said, "Oh, let's go get FEMA to pay for it. Let's make it happen." And I got our hopes up. And at the end of the day, we did not get that money. We did not get that rug replaced. And truly, that's not going to happen. The FEMA's going to pay to make sure that there's a working toilet in the home. There's some bedrooms that work for the number of people that are there, that there's a working kitchen, and the basic necessities are there. FEMA's habitability standards are often difficult to manage if you're a person with disabilities. So I really encourage you to advocate for your clients as you work through FEMA assistance. FEMA has been working towards making it a lot better, and they are now approving disability accommodations in homes, even if they didn't exist prior to the disaster. But I think it's still something that requires a lot of advocacy on our parts to ensure that if somebody has a wheelchair, that they get a ramp put into their new home when FEMA comes and repairs and helps makes those changes, that they get the handrails in the bathrooms and whatnot. So advocating is honestly the best route to go for your survivors there. So FEMA, some other tips and tricks to remember is FEMA can demolish your existing home and build you a new home or provide a FEMA trailer. So there are options there that they can work through with FEMA. If a survivor gets money to pay a landlord for a short time, they will have to submit receipts to FEMA. So they want to make sure that they're not spending that money on something else. It is for rental assistance, so they must spend it in that way. They should keep unmodified copies of all leases and receipts before and after the disaster in case FEMA does ask for proof of payment. And if there's too bad of a shortage of rental property, FEMA will try to help put evacuees in hotels or motels or wherever possible. Under the DRA, some of the housing assistance categories can be administered by a state. This is not something Pennsylvania does, but it's good to know in case there is another state that's doing it, or if in the future Pennsylvania decides to administer it themselves and just get funding through FEMA. Other needs assistance. Other needs assistance is typically, but not always, administered and partially funded by the state where the disaster occurred. Again, this is not something that Pennsylvania is doing, but it's good to know. You don't have to file a separate application for the other needs assistance. It's the exact same FEMA application, and the assistance will come through that manner. The funds, again, as I stated, the funds that FEMA gives you have to be spent exactly how FEMA tells you to spend them. And it's very easy to say that that's what you should do, and it's very hard to do that in reality. Oftentimes, you know, if your car is broken down and you need a car to get to work, and you're gonna go repair the car with the funds that you have available, regardless of where the money came from, people will prioritize that so that they can go to work, that they can continue normalcy life, as opposed to using the money to repair the home like FEMA told them to do. So it is hard to do, but it's something to keep in mind. Any money that you have received to replace destroyed items of the house and things should also be used exactly for that. Make an itemized list of everything that was destroyed so that you are able to submit that to FEMA, even if it's, you know, comes down to 5 t-shirts. Make a list of what was destroyed. FEMA will give transportation assistance to all of the household's vehicles if all of the household's vehicles are destroyed. So if there's one functioning vehicle, you may not get it. And the vehicle has to be registered and have the state minimum insurance at the time of the disaster for you to get that assistance. Let's see. If there are repairs need to be made, FEMA will require a itemized estimate from a certified mechanic to provide funding on that end. Serious needs assistance. We kind of covered this a little bit, but let's talk about it a little bit deeper. It is a new form of assistance that's available. It was $750. It's now been updated to $770 as of October, and it's available for disaster in all disasters receiving individual assistance. And it really just helps people buy food, water, baby formula, and other emergency supplies. The way that you qualify for SNA is, you know, you must qualify for FEMA assistance itself. Your identity must be confirmed. You must be in a declared disaster area. You must live at your home for most of the year. You can't have a, you know, secondary property that you live at. When you apply for FEMA assistance, you have to tell FEMA that you have a serious need and you need serious needs assistance at that point in your application. And that there must be some damage to your home to help go through that. Duplication of benefits is another issue that we need to keep in mind as we work through our clients. If your client has received funding from some other sources, FEMA will not be paying them out. If there is insurance to cover the damage, FEMA will not cover the money that's covered by the insurance. They are getting a little bit better about helping provide sort of funding for the gap that exists now, but it depends on a case-by-case basis. You can apply and ask FEMA to help pay for deductibles and see where that kind of gets you. Again, case-to-case basis, they'll work with you as things happen. If your home is not exactly where you actually live, FEMA's not going to pay for it. So if it is a rental property or an investment property that you own, you're not going to get any FEMA assistance for that because it's not the primary home that you're living in. And if another program or charity has fixed a property, such as Habitat for Humanity or some other organization, if they're already repairing it, FEMA's not going to pay for it because they're not going to duplicate any benefits. You could have some Medicaid portability issues, which is something to keep in mind. FEMA will deny some costs if Medicaid would cover them. But typically it's not an issue that arises, but just something to keep in mind. So I will kind of breeze through the DRRA in the interest of time, but DRRA was enacted in 2018, and a lot of big changes came out of this enactment. The biggest one being that FEMA has now separated the pots of money that are available. So in the beginning, the maximum benefit used to be used to be a set amount of money for both pots. It used to be at 37,000 when it was initially enacted. It has now updated to 42,500. Now the pots have been separated. You can get $42,000 for other needs assistance. You can get 42,500 for housing assistance. And that means you can get a total of 85,000 if my math is correct. For all of the damage that's there. The amount will change based on inflation each year. And a few things don't even count towards these pots, such as rental assistance or any expenses related to accessibility issues. They wouldn't count. So in essence, you can get a lot more funding from FEMA than you could ever get before. I'm going to skip to this part because that's just talking about how the state can also administer assistance. And I'll take another break if there's any questions. All right, hearing none. Let's power through this. So appeals, you do have a right to appeal. You have 60 days after the letter on your determination letter to appeal an issue from FEMA. And once you submit the appeal, you will go through the process where FEMA will review and give another determination. So common reasons for denial from FEMA include insurance covering the loss, not being eligible for disaster assistance here because somebody else covered it. Maybe you didn't have flood insurance when FEMA required you to have flood insurance. Maybe the damage that was sustained on your property wasn't sufficient. Maybe it was just defense damage and FEMA's not going to cover it. Oftentimes it is that FEMA is not able to identify whether you own your home or you live in your home. And those issues are the most common reasons for denials. And then if the damage was not caused by the disaster or if it was a secondary home, they're not going to fund it. Appeal deadlines, as I stated, 60 days, but you can put in a late appeal if there's good cause. The applicant can call the FEMA helpline to discuss the appeal if necessary, and it's honestly a good thing to do. The helpline is actually very, very helpful. The folks that man it are knowledgeable and are able to answer a lot of the questions. Oftentimes, I find some really good people on the call, and I keep them on for like a couple hours to talk through all of my cases, and it helps out. If you're unable to get a good enough answer on the helpline, you can always request to talk to a tier 2 employee, and they can they're more experienced and give you better answers on certain things. As of 2024, a written appeal letter is no longer required to support any to accompany any supporting documentation. But as we know, it's good practice to give FEMA a letter that says, this is why I'm appealing, this is the issue that I'm having, as opposed to just throwing a bunch of supporting documentation at them. It just helps out. It's no longer required though. So what makes a good FEMA appeal? So a good FEMA appeal has on each page at least the applicant's full name, the FEMA application number, the disaster number, pre-disaster primary address, phone number, address, and last for the social. This is mainly to ensure that no part of the application is lost in the process or misfiled in somebody else's documentation. It's This doesn't commonly occur if you're submitting it online, but oftentimes we are faxing these in, we're mailing these in, which can cause issues. Something you do want to say on an appeal that helps out is that you are appealing. The first sentence should say, I am appealing this decision from FEMA, so that it is very clear that that's what this documentation is for. And you should send any written consent from your client saying that you are a representative that's here to help them out when you're submitting the appeal, so that FEMA knows that, oh, this lawyer has permission to talk to them. And then you're going to talk about any reason for appeal that supports the decision that you're sending in, any law from FEMA that can support it, anything from their policy guide that can help out. And then pictures. You want all the pictures of all the damage from all angles, from everywhere. Before, after pictures are fantastic to have. And just give them everything that you can. What I typically say is you can give FEMA a jar of peanut butter, you can give them a loaf of bread, but it doesn't make that much of a difference. Sometimes you have to make the sandwich out and package it nicely and give it back to them to make the most impact for your client. Some tips to think about is, how did your client register? I've often had clients who are elderly and had their grandkids or their kids help them register. And sometimes they've checked the box that says that they want paperless notifications. So are the notifications going to a mailbox? Are they going to email that's not being checked? Where is it going? And then you want to inform FEMA of any address or contact information changes as they happen, so that they can find the survivor if they are displaced or wherever they are. Send in a request to FEMA to ask for a copy of the file. This can sometimes takes a couple months, but it's good to have the request in as soon as possible so that FEMA can begin processing it. And when you do ask for a copy of the file, it's not going to be a small file. It's going to be a thick 200-300 page file oftentimes that gives you every interaction, everything that's going on with this issue, so that you can understand what FEMA is seeing, and that can help guide your appeal documentation as well. And then you want your client documenting everything. You want them to document all the pictures of everything that's bad, that's been destroyed, all of those things from every angle. Videos are great, just to be able to document it, because when you come down a month or two later, it's not going to be as obvious how bad of the damage it was.
Just a note, we're getting ready to launch the second poll, so we'll watch for the poll and please respond unless you're talking, then it's fine.
Great. All right. And then for homes, you're going to need contractor documentation that shows what the damage was. For cars, you're going to need mechanics estimates. And then you want to make sure that they can find your contractor and mechanic as well. So if you are submitting something without their contact information, FEMA's not going to be able to find them to verify the information, and that's just going to continue delaying the process. Let's see. As I stated before, proof of ownership and proof of occupancy have been the biggest reasons for denial from FEMA assistance. And honestly, oftentimes it means that the house doesn't have clear title. People are living in heirs properties, or they just never got around to getting a deed in their name that shows that they own the home. That's something that you can truly help out our clients with. Nobody's going to be willing to make repairs on a home that's not owned by the applicant. And title clearing has been paying dividends for years for our clients as things go on. The documentation that FEMA now accepts has truly expanded from what it used to be. You can now prove ownership by showing a variety of different things, but nothing is as good as clear title, if you ask me. So FEMA for owner occupied, there's an odd definition that FEMA uses. There's 3 different ways that you could be an owner occupied resident. You could legally own the home. You could be a person that doesn't hold formal title to the residence and pays no rent, but is responsible for taxes or maintenance of the residence. So this definition often comes in handy for folks who are living in generationally owned property and don't have clear title. I've often submitted proof of tax payment and maintenance of the residence to show owner occupancy. And then the last thing is somebody who has lifetime occupancy rights with the formal title vested in another person. Based on the amendment that came out in early 2021, the documentation FEMA now accepts has been expanded exponentially. And if you're not able to prove any of the documents that are listed on the slide right now, your last resort is to prove occupancy by submitting a self-declarative statement saying that you do occupy the home and that you're not able to provide these other documents for XYZ reasons. But they've truly tried to make it a lot easier for the survivors. Same thing applies for ownership documentation as well. If you're not able to prove any of the documents on top here, you can submit a self-declarative statement. Whenever FEMA inspections happen, there are many issues that kind of occur, right? When a disaster strikes, FEMA is going to start hiring inspectors on the ground that are local in the disaster region. Oftentimes they have little to no training and there are limits on what they can do. They're not really allowed to go on the roof or go under a house. And it can be inconsistent from one inspector to the next. So you want to make sure that when somebody comes to your home, you provide them with as much information and detail as possible, because the information that they gather is going to help determine what FEMA's end decision is going to be on what they're going to provide you with. Oftentimes there are private insurance inspectors, and there are some fraud issues that can arise after that too, but they're not the same as FEMA inspectors. That's going to be something separate. During COVID-19 pandemic, FEMA did enact video inspections and remote inspections. Oftentimes they did not do a video. They would just give you a call and ask you to verbally tell them what the damage was, and that's honestly not sufficient. You need to see what the issue is if you're going to be an inspector. So oftentimes you did have to request a video enhancement to ensure that the inspection was done correctly and appropriately. If you are not comfortable, or your client is not comfortable with the inspector that came to your home to look at your property, you can call the FEMA helpline and say, I want a second inspection. You have a right to do that. Any survivor has a right for a second inspection. Oftentimes, FEMA is willing to send third and fourth inspectors as well to help document the issue. So it's great to advocate for that. And then what do you do once the funds come in from FEMA? Keep your receipts. FEMA can audit if they wish. They can come down for recoupments later. As I stated before, use the money for exactly what FEMA told you to do so that you are not susceptible to recoupment. And oftentimes FEMA can recoup a lot later. And then there will be times if you're a flooding disaster, FEMA will ask a client or a survivor to get flood insurance. What they basically will do is they will provide a group flood insurance policy that'll cover the survivor for the first 3 years. And then after that, the survivor has to get their own flood insurance. If you do not get flood insurance after the first 3 years are up and you fail to maintain that, you will no longer qualify for future FEMA assistance in other disasters that might occur. That means that requirement goes with the land. It doesn't go with the person. So if you sell your property and the next owner comes in and they realize that they should have had flood insurance, but they don't get it, FEMA doesn't care. It's still going to apply to the new owner. And then finally, FEMA funds cannot be garnished or seized. So that's one good note there. We do at the end of the PowerPoint have a bunch of guides and documents that you can review as you assist your disaster survivor. But a few that I did want to highlight are the new updates, of course, and then the Legal Aid Disaster Resource Center. The Legal Aid Disaster Resource Center is a website that was developed by the Legal Services Corporation and multiple organizations, and it really helps survivors themselves. It helps legal aid attorneys and pro bono attorneys with some legal manuals on various disaster legal issues, and it also helps organizations set up and provide some mitigation efforts for their own organization to have a continuity of operations plan. So I encourage you to take a look at the site when you can. And that is it on my end. Charlie, any additional thoughts on your side?
I just want to take a second to plug the Legal Aid Disaster Resource Center. When I first started doing this work, this is where I spent a lot of my time. It's got really fantastic like quick guides and little one sheet flyers and information on the different programs and how FEMA works and how the SBA works and all these things. So I spent a lot of time living on there and kind of using that as a resource to get myself up to speed on it. So I just wanted to plug that for folks who want to check it out.
The one question in the chat was about where was the disaster recovery center and could it be telephoned? And Jen Heverly has put the information about Tioga County DRC in Westfield, PA in the chat. And also the phone number to apply for FEMA individual assistance. But it's my understanding at the DRC, there's generally not a phone number. This is a stop by location. And anybody from any of the counties could now come to this site if they wanted to travel a couple of hours over rural roads to get there. I guess I'd be interested if there's other questions in the chat, but we have a couple of minutes left. What kind of FEMA appeal issues were the most challenging, Charlie, for you here that you've been working on, or Shrusti, the kind of issues you see? I will say that in this disaster, what FEMA told us is the typical assistance has really been because of the nature of the flooding, with folks getting their houses really not everybody on the same street even, but lots of water. There was a lot of furnace repairs, and obviously some whole house problems, but it was a lot of aid went to replacing boilers and things like that. But what kind of issues are you seeing come up in appeals that were most challenging from a flooding disaster?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, well, I'll say one of the issues that I used to experience pretty regularly that has actually been changed thanks to the new FEMA regulations was that in appeals that I had worked on, it was a pretty common reason for denial that they weren't able to prove that it was directly tied to the disaster. A lot of times they would say that there was pre-existing damage or that this was damage that had been exacerbated by the storm rather than caused by the storm. And that was a hang up for a while with FEMA and trying to actually prove that causal link between the two. But with these new updates in March, FEMA has changed that. It's no longer required to show that causal link if it's pre-existing damage and the damage has been made worse by the disaster. That's completely fine now that you don't need to worry about um, proving that link. As long as you can prove that you were impacted by the disaster, that's really kind of all that matters for them. So that was one of the more common issues that came up in FEMA pretty regularly when I was doing it.
Yeah, I think most of them are just similar things that repeat. It's a matter of helping the client package their information and just voice the concerns in a way that FEMA will listen a lot easier. I think the weirdest client I had was a survivor who came to me wanting a divorce because her husband had taken all the FEMA money and used it to repair his second home, which he had with the second family. And FEMA was now recouping the funds from her because the application was in her name. So I think that was the most ridiculous and weird case that I had. I'm sad to report that she decided to go back to her husband and did not move forward with the divorce. But things come up. But oftentimes it's just routine. People aren't able to prove that they own the home. People are not able to prove that they live in the home. Or there's insurance disputes that are going on. It's really nothing scary to work on. It's not anything super difficult. It's just a matter of packaging it for them. I know a lot of times people consider FEMA appeals to be these administrative appeals, and it's a big scary monster. It's truly not. It's a letter that we're sending to FEMA to just tell them what the situation is for the survivor.
Hmm. And even though it's not required anymore to include the letter, I feel like I would still encourage folks to use it. It's essentially like a cover letter. You just use it as an opportunity to kind of paint the picture of what all the documentation means and what the issue is, and it really helps FEMA when it comes to making the assessments. So even if it's not required anymore, I feel like I would still encourage folks to do it if they're working with legal aid.
You can engage paralegals on it. I see a question in the chat that says, is this admin law, can we engage paralegal? It is, for the most part, it is going to be federal law and admin work, so you can engage paralegals in it under your supervision to help out. There are even tools available online that can help generate a FEMA appeal that you can kind of use as a first draft and work on. I don't recommend them being your only draft because you do want to put legal analysis and thought behind the process. But yes, you can certainly use paralegals to help out there. One thing I do want to note that, you know, when there is one disaster issue, there's oftentimes underlying 4 or 5 other issues down there too. So keep in mind these clients are already people who don't have much. They're indigent. They're working with our legal aid organizations because they qualified for legal services in the first place. And to not have much and then to lose it all is just the next level of devastation. They're super vulnerable. I encourage people to be a little bit more trauma informed as they talk to the clients, and they're going through a very difficult time just trying to survive. And it's the best thing that you can do is to help them out and, you know, put your powers of an education to great use. I think I saw one more question in the chat. What are some actions volunteers can take to help people with legal issues after a disaster? Do you want to take that one, Charlie?
Yeah, sure. I'm assuming we're talking about volunteers like on the disaster response side. I think one of the biggest things is just community education. So like I mentioned in the beginning, I'm housed in the community engagement unit, which LASP uses as the kind of coordinating group for all of our outreaches and our community education and our CLEs and our trainings and things like that. And we consciously decided to put this role in that unit because one of the biggest issues we had was just making people aware of who we are and what we can do, especially in the disaster relief world. A lot of people didn't realize that legal services were included in the Stafford Act and that legal aid is always activated in these disasters, and just kind of teaching folks about what type of work we can offer, how legal needs can pop up in a disaster. I think that's like a really big lift for us, and it's something that volunteers can do to really help out with that. I've been getting pretty involved with the regional VOAD here to try and just kind of avail myself to folks, and it's gotten to the point now where I've been consistent enough and doing it long enough that folks know who I am and what legal aid does, and as they spot these issues kind of on their own through case management or direct response to survivors, that they know how to get them in touch with me so they can address those issues. So I think that's really like the biggest piece.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that, you know, oftentimes when a disaster strikes, everybody's really willing and able to help out, and the hearts are in the right place, and the energy is there, but the legal issues are not going to come in the first couple weeks. They're going to come in down the road. It's going to take a few months for them to trickle through. So I do encourage anybody that's interested in assisting disaster survivors, hang in there. The cases will come. I really encourage you 6 months down the road to still be willing to take these cases because the survivors are going to need it at that time.
We're about 3 years out from the disaster, and I still get cases referred to me through partners and doing this work out in the community. So like Shruti said, there's not as many, but they're much more complicated. So they do still come up.
If you're in one of Pennsylvania's counties, you can either come to North Penn or Northwestern directly to volunteer for services and indicate that you've had this training, that you're interested in helping. The PBA, the Pennsylvania Bar Association, has also been involved in the organizing calls, and they're more than willing to assist. And you could reach out to Dave Travascus or Bill Baldwin if you want to register for help in that way. Charlie has done another training for programs. And I think as we create disaster preparedness, the more resources we have, the better. But Jen Heverly is right on the call. She's the managing attorney in our Williamsport office. She's handling the FEMA hotline through her office with our wonderful AmeriCorps volunteer who is handling those calls. So you're welcome to reach out to Jen Heverly if you're interested in volunteering in any way as cases might start to come in. I do understand there was a call from North Carolina for any attorneys who were interested in helping with that disaster, and they would provide resources for out-of-state attorneys to provide assistance. So, and there are significant legal issues there that will arise. I know when last worked on Ida before Charlie joined the program, one of the ways they found so many clients was the remnants of Tropical Storm Ida really impacted some mobile home, manufactured home communities. And they found many people who were suffering through that and getting both housing assistance and having to rebuild. So we have lots of manufactured homes in Northeast Pennsylvania and lots of people who are really vulnerable to these storms. So I really thank Shrusti and Charlie for doing this presentation for us. Sean has put the slides link there, and Shrusti has put her email at LSC. Charlie's easy to reach as well at LASP. And I'm, of course, Lori Malloy, the Executive Director at North Penn Legal Services. So feel free to reach out to any of us if you have any questions or concerns. And I thank you all so much for joining this. It's not quite the end, but almost the end of Pro Bono Month, October 31st. And thank you, all of you, for joining us today. Much appreciated.
Thank you for having us, Lori, and for setting up such a fantastic CLE.
Yeah, thank you, Lori, and thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you very much.